Welcome to this edition of Inside Sports. I'm Nodley Wright. In this episode, we look at all that transpired with Reggae Boy's journey to Japan and the cancellation of the Kirin Cup. Welcome back to Inside Sports. I'm Nodley Wright. With me in studio is Technical Director of Cavaliers Youth Football Team and Football Analyst, Paul Maxwell, and Football Analyst and Sports Management Consultant, Machel Turner. On May 14th, it was announced by the Jamaica Football Federation that Jamaica's senior men's team would be part of the Kirin Challenge Cup, which is an annual association football tournament organized in Japan by the Kirin Beverage Company. As part of its involvement in the tournament, Jamaica was scheduled to play the host country, Japan, on June 3, then Serbia on June 7, and Japan's Olympic team on June 12. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Firstly, there were 11 players who we lost at the beginning. What sort of impact will this have on Coach Whitmore's strategy?
Okay, from what I see, 8 of those 11 players were possible starters. So right away you're going to be having a watering down of whatever team is going to take the field for the matches after to almost a C team, because already we're missing a couple regular starters. So I'm not sure what we're going to see going on the field.
Machel, do you have an input with that?
Yes, I think it's even bigger for the longer term in terms of preparing for the Gold Cup and going forward to World Cup qualifiers, because you want to see, Coach Whitmore would surely want to see everybody or as many people as possible in one place. And now that's not going to happen. So there's a lot of question marks that he'll have to deal with after this.
All right, let's look at the 11 absences. Who are these players and why were they absent? Would you like to go first?
Okay, well, the first ones that we know that pulled out first was Michael Hector and Bobby De Cordova-Reid. Basically, we know that they had played a full season, and we normally
like everybody
have
else.
heard that most players, once it reaches the end of the season, they want to get their holidays. So we heard that they did withdraw from the team quite early, right? So we heard about those two very early. The third English player that we also heard was in the championship final. That was Ethan Pinnock. So we knew about him also pulling out at that stage. I don't know if Machel wants to go on.
Andre Blake.
Yes, the big miss are the senior players, the guys with the caps, Andre Blake, Kemar Lawrence, Alvas Powell, Corey Burke to a lesser extent. They've decided to stay with their clubs, or well, Alvas doesn't have a club, so
Right.
Not certain what the reasoning behind.
My understanding is this though, that with the players the MLS players, that they had a match a day before, maybe on the 30th, and they were supposed to depart the following day. With that being the situation, I think their clubs requested that they travel properly. But I understand that they were traveling economy, which the club said, no, that can't work. So as a result, the players withdrew. But isn't this part of the same situation that existed before, where the players demanded that, or had that in their discussions, that as a part of the agreement, that they would travel properly, which is business class,
Yes,
Sir Paul?
we have heard this for quite some time now. It has come up. I think this was also part of the package, that they had requested certain things, really travel arrangements and stuff for the players. We have heard this before, but coming up now, it seems that doesn't seem to have been resolved.
But why do we keep having these situations? Why this recurrence? And why is there a difference between the players coming out of Europe, say UK to be specific, who are traveling business class, and everyone else, maybe with the exception of the JFF hierarchy, troubling economy? Why? Marshall?
Really can't answer that. You'd have to ask the leadership of the JFF. But if it's a problem that keeps coming up over and over again, it's clear that it's something that they're not intentional about resolving. So that's a question that they'll have to answer. And obviously, it's clearly not a part of the agreement that was agreed.
Well, right. But here's something that is mystifying. Tyreek McGee was in Amsterdam. Then all of a sudden, he's back in Jamaica. What's the story with that?
Well,
I think we have a recording to play with Tyreek. Then we'll take your views on that.
Sometime I can go to Jamaica, then to Amsterdam to meet up with the English player. So when we reach Amsterdam now, we meet up with Winston and the English player there. But I never know that meeting the Winston, I did a part of Jason, right? When we give a control everything to the players and I organize everything and teach them and say, you know, control everything, right? So they had
represent JFF, you know. Represent JFF, yeah, man.
Yeah, represent JFF one thing. I got me get to buy it after I talk some money, but with the day at the lounge for a while, and then I time to board the flight now, so I board the flight and thing. And later I took the COVID test them. So she had check and my COVID test is good and next youth COVID test is good. But just a player them, it was like 11 now, 9 players test never good and me and the next youth test is good, right? And as I'm about to board the flight now, them take a wait first. Winston them take a wait because we just like them there's no way possible to the English players can't go on the flight because of that they lead and thing. But then the lady come back in now and say, if you want the two players with the good just them go on the flight, right? So Winston say no, let's stick together.
Oh, him say no. Okay.
So no, we have to stick together as a group. So and at the same time, I did call money. I did try to get to money. That's alright.
Yeah.
But them did trouble at the time.
Right.
If never did get the call. So what it initially I needed to go to Belgium and then like stay in Belgium for a couple of days and then come back in the year, go back to Amsterdam to travel. But the thing is, we have a resident permit, we have a resident card for Europe. So if we go to Belgium, we would have to download a passenger location form. And then we would have a quarantine for 14 days before we can move again. So we couldn't leave the airport. And we couldn't come out of the airport to Amsterdam. Without Amsterdam, a part of Europe as well.
Yeah.
We come out of a quarantine. Yeah, so they're saying that everybody's going now and leave me. They're alone then at the airport go out. So they're at the airport from Sunday morning to Tuesday morning. Yeah. What did really get me feel away? I'm there at the airport, nobody know about crew about me, and then him got the navigator and said to me, somebody asked the can't stay 2 extra days, why the person can't contact me? And ask me, them I got 2 1 sources to get to me. They're not even link me and know how me I do if my good, if my eat up now, whatever.
Now, it is even more mystifying hearing Tyreek McGee now. I'm going to go to Marshall first and come to you, Sir Paul. What do you make of that, Marshall?
I don't know what to make of it. I'm baffled as to why the 2 players with the good test weren't allowed to just go ahead to Japan and why they had to stay with the team, as Tyreek is saying there. So that's the big question for me. What was the reasoning behind that?
That's one of the big questions, but the bigger one is, then you say the team is sticking together. Then all the others with British passports left him inside the airport and basically left him without care. Now, this for me is disservice to country, because the Winston he speaks about is Winston Clark, who is an agent who looks after games. Now, how did he get that authority to determine that players who are going to represent their country should not proceed on to their destination? How could that be, Sir Paul?
Well, he is actually representing the JFF at that time. So we have
As an agent, not as a manager.
Well, that's true. But from what I understand, he was the person in possession of the group booking. So he had some sort of authority at that point.
But there may be a slight difference there, because the other player whose COVID test was correct was Blair Turgott, who was coming in, I think, from Sweden. So both Blair and Tyreek McGee, who were the direct responsibility of Roy Simpson, then how is it that those who came out of Jamaica or those in direct communication with Roy Simpson got matters correct, yet those coming out of the UK didn't? We're going to take a break now, and then we return to the second half. Welcome back to Inside Sports, and we're back for the second segment of our discussion concerning what transpired with Reggae Boys in Japan. And still with me are Paul Maxwell and Machel Turner. I did ask the question before we went on break, how could it be that people are on different wavelengths? The general manager of the team is Roy Simpson. He got it correct. How could Winston Clark not get it correct? And then to compound matters, disrupt the team's plans. How could that be, Sir Paul?
Well, I guess he's overstepped his authority at that point right there.
You guess?
I'm guessing that's basically what happened, because he took it on it and made the decision that everybody was going to be moving as a group, and then the other two, who they obviously said that they could have gone on the flight, he said no. They were going to basically wait. So.
And this led to the cancellation of the cup, because this is disgraceful. Don't you think heads should roll? There should be some consequences.
Well, to be honest, even if those two had gone, I think they would still have had a cancellation, because what made the problem was the tests, where the bulk of them couldn't go. So even if those two did go, it still would have probably been a cancellation anyway.
Well, how could they get that wrong?
That's a communication issue, and that's something that's repeating itself over and over again, constantly. Communication issues between the JFF and players or other stakeholders, and what needs to be done is just not efficient and not being done correctly, and that's it again.
But generally, COVID tests which allow people to travel is a nose swab. Why were they taking a throat swab? Do you know of that being done for anything? You have traveled through Europe with teams.
Well, no, the general thing now for anybody, it has to be the nasal that goes all the way back. That's what they're supposed to have been done. I don't know. It was miscommunication somewhere along the line. I don't know anything more, but I just know there's definitely, everybody that travels now knows the type of test that you have to take.
Okay. All right, let us move on now to some of our homegrown players who didn't make the trip. Captain Andre Blake, Kemar Lawrence, Alva Spoil. These are three senior players. What do you think is the reason for them pulling out? Do you see it as a lack of commitment, maybe?
Well, I think there are some lingering problems, to be honest, based off of the agreement, with the contract. I think even though that they did sign, I don't get the idea that all of the players signed willingly.
What makes you say that?
Well,
I'm coming to you, Machel.
Well, okay, to be honest, right away we heard from Damian Lowe that yes, we signed the coach, talked to everybody, and he was the main spokesperson at that point. We have never heard anything from Kemar or Andre, and they were also very vocal at certain stages.
They're leaders in the team.
And then, they are some of the leaders in the team. And they had also taken certain stances in regards to issues that were going on. I won't go into more detail, but they did take certain stances at the time. Okay. So for them to have withdrawn at that last moment, to be honest, to me it looks like they withdrew and they knew that the JFF could not replace them at that stage also. They knew that they could not get a replacement at that late stage. Right. So they knew that the team would be short at least 4 players.
Let me get your take on it, Machel. And you may factor in that Kemar Lawrence moving from Belgium back to the MLS. What's your take on the whole situation and the withdrawal of these key players?
Yeah, I mean, I think also that there's probably some lingering issues. We know for a fact that Coach Whitmore had to speak to the guys for them to sign the agreement and had to cajole and convince them to sign the agreement. So it's something very strange, because you think also that with that commitment to the coach and that they seem to have, that they would want to show up for him, knowing that this is an important set of games before we go to the Gold Cup and before we start World Cup qualifying. So all I can think is that there's still something going on behind the scenes that we just don't know, and they'll have to answer themselves.
Let me ask you this. Alvas Powell was in Africa, played only one game, came back early. So basically he has been inactive. Did the JFF set up itself by naming players who had unresolved issues, as in Alvas Powell 1, no club, Kemar Lawrence in transition, and the JFF's insistence on regular travel as opposed to business, bearing in mind that these players were going to be active like a day before travel? Did they, Sir Paul, this is for you?
They definitely set up themselves, because to be honest, there are certain things even from the start. When you saw Ethan Pinnock was one of them that had to withdraw.
He was involved in a playoff game.
You knew of some of these things from before, right? So to be honest, even with Alvas Powell not being, he's looking to try to get signed. You know, some of these things with a proper communication, these things, they should have used other players that you need. Because this is the last chance you're going to get to look at players before the Gold Cup. And per se, possibly before the World Cup qualifying, because we're not expecting to see any mass players. I'm not expecting to see any new players in when the World Cup qualifiers start, because there's no time to work with them. It basically is a match situation at that stage.
All right. Before we touch on Andre Blake as captain, because there is this view that with him pulling out, that shows poor leadership. Are you of that view, Michelle? And you could take it after Sir Paul. Are you of that view that him pulling out shows a lack of commitment and leadership? I'm certainly not of that view, but I'd like to hear from you.
One thing, I wouldn't question Andre's commitment and that he wants to be involved, but it seems it's something that if I was a member of the team, I'd be looking at, and I'd have some questions, unless it's something that he's explained to the group why he's doing what he's doing. But yeah, it leaves a bad taste and it looks bad. But okay. I wouldn't question Andre's desire to be a part of the team going forward.
Sir Paul?
Well, I have a different view with that, because Andre had made certain public statements about the inclusion of new British players. You
mean Jamaicans born in Britain?
Jamaican born in Britain at a certain stage, that he was against it. And that alone, he has never retracted or said anything differently, since making that particular statement. And to be honest, I think that statement alone would...
But what did Blake really say? I think what he did was to question their willingness all of a sudden to commit to Jamaica. And this is not an unreasonable position, really, because when Jamaica were going through playing Caribbean opposition, these players didn't make themselves available. And there are a number of these players, Andre Gray, Michael Antonio. These are players who were invited before who turned it down. Now, is it unreasonable then for Andre Blake to then ask the question, why now?
Okay, hold on. One of the things that a lot of people don't know, you have English-born Jamaican players that are born in England who have always contacted the JFF and have been interested, but sometimes it's the JFF who have not called them.
Who are some of these players?
Who have not called them.
Who are some of these players?
I wouldn't be able to give you right off the hand right now, but they are players.
And I do believe so. There's Ben Godfrey, who was just called up by England. His coach wrote the JFF a few years ago, indicating that he was willing and available to play for Jamaica. They never even got a response. Now England has called him up. But the situation with Michael Antonio and Andre Gray and others, they were invited, but they didn't come. But there's something else that goes with what you're saying. There's a player, Anthony Grant, midfielder, defensive midfielder, who has declared his interest. No one has responded
But
to him.
he's 33 going 34.
Yes, but we had Peter Cargill and others playing well into their 30s. So if you're good enough, you're good enough. Should age be considered
No,
then?
that should be a consideration because 33 going 34 at this stage, if you're going to be coming into the team at that stage, the matches that we're going to basically be going at a situation where we're going to be having 3 matches within 9 days. I don't think we're going to want a 34-year-old who might be suspect in doing at least 2 full matches.
Might be, you don't know for sure. But how about having him and having a Kevin Lambert as an understudy, seeing that we have no one with the abilities to play that role? We're shooting ourselves in the foot. But where does all of this leave Coach Whitmore now? The Gold Cup is a few weeks away. We don't have a proper squad to play against Serbia and the Japan under-23. Where does this leave him?
Well, the big problem that I see that's going to be coming up is that right now the MLS is on break until I think the 20th. And when the Gold Cup starts, there's not going to be any, the MLS is not going to go on break, either the USL. So when we're calling these players, I'm just wondering if issues will not reoccur at that time, the availability of some of these players.
Okay.
So that's something.
Marshall?
No man, the clubs will have to release them because that would have been in the FIFA calendar that they would be obligated to release them. The players won't be obligated to answer the call. So that's the thing.
That's tricky, Marshall, because even though FIFA says that you ought to honor that, is it within the FIFA window and for how long?
If it's in the FIFA calendar, which it is, then the clubs are obligated to unless there's an injury or something.
However, a club can tell you that if you go, there's no guarantee of your starting spot being there when you come back. Plus, USL players only have a contract for 1 year. So at the end of the year, they're out of contract. And I'm thinking that when they are to be re-signed, if possible, things like that will be taken into consideration that we might be losing you for extended periods.
Yeah.
And from a business perspective, can you fully blame the clubs?
No.
I think not. Let us look now at the games that we're going to play Serbia. Based on all that has transpired, all the changes, how do you think we'll fare? He laughs.
It's going to be Coach Whitmore putting a puzzle together from scratch. Because again, just like the USA friendlies, this is a team it's what we have right now is a collection of players that don't have much time together, don't know each other that well. So it's going to again be something where we're trying to figure out stuff during 90 minutes, whereas Serbia knows what they're doing. And Japan under 24 knows what they're doing. And that's a problem, especially going forward.
Well, my thing is that we're basically down to around 20 players right now. And then if you take that out of the equation, that 3 of them are goalkeepers. Right now, outfield, it's limited. The coach has basically, he'll have to do another miracle patch something together because there are a lot of players there. As I said, 8 of the players that withdrew would have been players that would have been starting in anything that he would have wanted to do. So he's basically going to have a lot of very junior players and possibly some local based players who have not played football for over 15, 16 months in that.
So are you saying, and you first, Sir Paul, are you saying lose to Serbia, beat Japan under 24?
Well, I'm hoping that we can get a positive result in at least the Japan game.
So you're giving up the Serbia game?
Definitely.
Are you of a similar view, Marshall?
I don't see a positive result in either games, just because the Japan team has been training. They're preparing for the Olympics, so they've been together. They would have played Japan, their senior team, this morning in place of Jamaica playing the senior team. So they'll also have had a game under their belt together. Yeah, it's going to be it's a tough ask.
And broadly, before we wrap up, because we're going to do so shortly, what lessons do you believe were learned or will be learned on this trip?
Proper communication is key.
Proper communication.
is key.
I don't know if anything will be learned because, as we've said throughout, this is stuff that has come up before. Flights, communication, is stuff that's come up before. So I'll wait until I see it change.
My thing is, they don't show that they have the capacity or the interest to learn. So even though we say everyone must learn, well, we speak mainly of children. Adults sometimes are too stuck in their ways. That's a wrap for Inside Sports for this week. Special thanks to Mr. Paul Maxwell and Michelle Turner. Have a good one.